Good afternoon, everyone. If anyone is out there in the internet watching today, we are going to run through our Rosetta Tomorrow program. This is a chance for anyone to get involved with 3D printing, TinkerCad, and really understanding that kind of space if that's the kind of thing they're interested in. Throughout the session, we're going to break it into 3 kind of sections with a small break between each one. To start with, we're going to get straight into TinkerCad and designing and building some very simple structures, and then we're going to move on to something a little bit more complicated before finishing up with some techniques for how to add detail and really get the most out of our design. So if you haven't already, jump onto bit.ly/Rosetta Tomorrow. And you can see all of the stages in the program there, and then you can jump into this session and we'll give you a hand with the actual design and building, partly through demonstration. If you have any questions at any time, please don't hesitate to just pop them in the chat box down below or to the side, depending on what device you are using. Okay, so that being the case, let's jump into it. So what we have here is our website. It's lovely, it's new. But before we do anything with 3D printing, one of the major things we want to do is check that it's actually working. So if at any point you're kind of stuck with what to do for a 3D design, it's really useful to start with a sketch. So I've booted up Sketchpad here. For those who haven't used it before, it's basically an online version of pen and paper, just so we can show you the kind of thing we're talking about. So for Rosetta Tomorrow, the challenge is to design something focused around your everyday life, something that you experience and you want to share with future generations. So for me, something that I've been missing at the moment is catching up with friends and family back home in Adelaide. So I want to share that idea of like a family dinner. So for this, I'm just going to use a pencil, and I think one of the most important parts of that is going to be our table. So I'm going to start by just sketching out a rough table. It doesn't need to be accurate yet. This is just so that when we start designing that proper 3D model, we know kind of how many of each thing we want and roughly the size of each one compared to each other. Now, we want it to be a single piece, so I'm actually going to make this table a very solid block. This might confuse people in the future. They might think that we're all built into the tables, but I think they should be a bit clever enough to work that out. So then I'm going to include some people around the table, and I'm going to have their legs come in underneath. So hopefully you can see this kind of thing. We're going to give each of them a bit of a head. Now, again, it doesn't need to be accurate. It's just so we can get an idea. Now, in my family, there's actually 5 of us. So I'm going to include one more person here, right at the end. But then, what's our family without our little dog, Jelly? So I'm going to include our dog down here. And this is going to be sculpted in so that we can show Jelly under the table there, because she's always going for scraps. In the middle, we're going to give everyone their own plate. But then I'm thinking here we might put something big and delicious looking, maybe a chicken, maybe some salad. We'll work it out when we get a little bit further. But we've got a very rough idea of the kind of concept and what we want to build. So if we have a look through our sway, you can see we're already blazing ahead. We've got our first idea. We've made a 2D version. We've sketched it out. And you can see I haven't included any of the annotations yet. So I'm the only one working on this particular design. But if we were going to share it with others, it would be handy for them to know what I'm doing. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to label each of these person. And I'm going to do it poorly because it doesn't really matter. I'm the only one. I'm just going to draw big arrows to all of our people. You can see I'm using a different color so it's a bit clearer. I'm going to put an arrow here to my jelly. She's very cute, Jelly. We miss her a lot when I'm not with them. We've got plates here, so we're going to make a mess of this and label all of these as plates. And then in the center, we're going to put big meal. Now, as you may be able to hear, I'm using a lot of mouse for this. Hopefully you have access to a pen and paper and you can make this a lot faster. But that's the idea we're going to start building with, so let's get into TinkerCAD. So for those who haven't used it before, TinkerCAD is an object-oriented design software for 3D modeling. What this means is that when we want to build a large, complicated object, we build it out of lots of smaller, discrete shapes. This is things like cubes, spheres, tubes, all of that kind of thing. And it just occurred to me, yep, I seem to be coming through. I'll just check sound. I want to build a lot, and sound's working. So you can hear me if anyone is out there. So you can see here what we've built is a spice grinder, and this is made up of lots of different shapes. But if we just drag a big box over to select them all just like that, and we go ungroup up here in the top right, we can see eventually just how many different pieces went into making that. So you can see we've got a door here that's made of several pieces all coming together so that it looks like a drawer. It's not going to work, but that's okay. This is just a model. We've got our fancy handle up here that you can see we've built from lots of different shapes all stuck together. But then for this main body, even though it looks quite complicated, we've actually just stacked a series of different shapes, one on top of the other, to get up to that kind of more detailed final piece that we're after. So let's undo all of that. So we're just going to click this undo button up in the top left and just step back so that we've got off that design from the end. When we want to change the angle so we can see it from a few different spaces, we just click up on this cube and just drag it around. And you can see there that I've left the back quite blank at the moment, but that's okay because try to think, do we need a complicated back on a spice grinder? Probably not really. And if it's just to show what we're after looks-wise, then I think this is a pretty good start. So if you've managed to get into TinkerCAD by now, you should be at this page here, which will show all the recent designs. Yours will potentially be empty or it might be full. You may have already started some of your TinkerCAD designs previously to today. And in which case we're just going to go create new design here. And this will open a blank workspace for us where we have plenty of room to build and design. So up the top left here, you can see it's currently named it Fantabulous Rotasango. Now this is just made up words, but it means that it's already saved because it has a name. So we're just going to change this to Family Table and give it a little bit more detail. So in 4 years, when I come back to have another look at it, I know exactly what's there and I can find it easily. So the first piece of our big kitchen table is going to be this big rectangle right in the middle there. Now for this rectangle, we're going to have a look through, I'm going to close that one, have a look through our shapes palette, which is this section on the right. And this is all the different shapes that we can incorporate into our design. To start with, I think I might actually use a box and just drop that onto our work plane. You can see it immediately snaps down onto that work plane, and if we drag the camera around, you can see it's flat there. Now, if you've ever used any of the Microsoft Office programs, you might already notice that we've got these little white and black handles on, and these allow us to change the size of our shape. So if we want our shape to be a lot bigger, we just need to click on one of those handles and drag it right out. And you can see as we do that, there's these numbers, And each of these numbers tell us how many millimeters big that object is. So if we want to be really specific, so maybe we want a ratio, let's make this one 100, and this one, let's leave it at, say, 80. So now we've got a bit smaller rectangle here. If we want to make it taller, we just need to click on this center one and lift it up a bit. And that takes us to 30 millimeters tall, which is 3 centimeters. So as we deselect it there, you can see when we've selected it, it'll get this blue outline and all of the handles appear. The handles are all of these little different things that we can edit it with. And when we deselect it, those disappear. So now that we've got it deselected, we're just gonna check that it's looking pretty good. And I'm happy with that. So let's move on to our next step, which I think should be our doggy. Now, Jelly, our dog, we're going to actually use what's called the scribble tool. Now, the scribble tool is listed under basic shapes, and it looks like a scribble. When we select it and move on to our work plane, you can see it's got that same shape. But when we activate it, it actually changes from our 3D space to a 2D space. And this is where we can draw something to then extrude it or stretch it out into 3 dimensions. So I'm going to draw a very quick dog. Here. And I'm going to fill in this space because I don't want Jelly to look too much like a skeleton. She's got little back feet. And you can see up in this top right hand corner, we've actually got a preview of what our design is going to look like. So then we're going to give her some front legs. Bit of a dog head happening up here. Pointy ear. And then a very pointy tail. Smooth that out. If we do make a mistake, like maybe we decided that Jelly was going to be a Pegasus dog, and we gave her wings and then decided we didn't like them, we could come back down here to the eraser tool and just clear up anything that's happening there. So we trim that off, rub it out. There we go. And just like that, it's gone. Once we're done and we're happy with our design, we're going to come down to the bottom right here and just click Done. Now that we've got Jelly, we can see in our sketch that we want Jelly at the end of the table and standing upright. But at the moment, Jelly is flat on the ground, just like our table. So to turn Jelly so that she's standing up, we want to select it and use these double-headed arrow tools. And these allow us to rotate that shape around each of the 3 axes for 3 dimensions. So to have her standing up, we actually want this one here. And by keeping the cursor close to the middle, it snaps to these 22.5 degree increments. So we can get a rotated 90 degrees just so Jelly's standing upright. Then we're going to shrink Jelly down a bit because I've made her into a bit of a sausage dog. And there we go. I can click and drag Jelly to the end of our table. I'm just going to zoom out using the zoom tool over here on the left so that I can see a bit more of what's going on. I'm then going to rotate using the camera here. And now Jelly is eating the table, and we want to set into it a bit. So we're going to use another one of those double-headed arrow rotate tools and just click, whoop, and rotate Jelly through 90 degrees. I'm then going to stick her into the table, and you can see that Jelly is actually sticking into the ground at the moment. So we've made her a little bit too big and also a little bit too low. So to solve how low she is, so she's not sticking in the ground, we're going to use this pyramid tool. and just lift her up so that this number gets to 0. And this means she'll be just standing flat on our work plane. Then I'm going to click the top arrow here. I'm going to use a new function. I'm going to hold shift as I move it. And this means that Jelly will stay in proportion, but just get a bit smaller. So she won't stretch out like a funhouse mirror. She'll stay quite even, just like that. Now, I'm a bit complicated sometimes when I think, but rather than having Jelly stick out of the side of the table, I'd rather Jelly sink into it. So rather than using an emboss, which means that it's sticking out of the surface, I'm going to turn Jelly into a deboss, or a hole. And this is where she cuts into that main surface of the table. So when Jelly's selected, up here in the right hand side, you can see we have a shape box. Now this will be different for every one of the shapes available, but I'm going to select hole, and you can see now that Jelly's turned a little bit invisible. And if we change our camera around, you can see that we can see each of the edges of Jelly there. So I'm going to sink Jelly into the table. I'm then going to hold shift while Jelly is selected and click the table, so now they're both selected. And I'm then going to come up here to the top right and use our group tool. And what our group tool does is it merges all of the shapes currently selected into one new object. So because I've got Jelly selected as a whole and the table selected, it's actually going to use Jelly to cut into that table so that we get a Jelly-shaped hole. You can see it flashes those lines that are red up here, showing that it's currently calculating what that new shape is going to look like. And if we zoom in a bit here, we can see we now have a Jelly-shaped hole in our table. So, what do you think should be next for our table? Well, if we look at our sketch, we should always start with the big objects and then move down to the smaller details. So I think it's time to add our family around the table. So I'm going to come back to TinkerCad and we're going to build some people. Now the biggest part of a person is their body, and I think we should start with a cylinder because people are kind of like big cylinders. So we're going to drag this in just to make it a bit flatter. So you can see there that now we've got kind of like the torso of a person. I'm then going to come and select this round, not this round roof. We want to select this half sphere. And I'm going to use this half sphere to round out the shoulders of this person that we've made. So because I've changed the shape of the cylinder first, it's a bit hard to change the shape of our half sphere to match it. So to work that out, I'm going to select our cylinder and have a look at its dimensions. And these are the size in millimeters of how big it is. So that's these numbers here and here. So we can now see that it's 21 millimeters wide and 11 millimeters deep. So I'm now going to select our half sphere, click the handles to activate those dimensions, and I want it 21 millimeters wide and 11 millimeters deep. Just like that. Now I can change the angle of our camera so you can see it a bit better. Now I'm going to move this half sphere up so that the bottom of it is just below the top of our cylinder. And then I'm going to try and position them over each other. Now you can see that what we've got there isn't quite matching up. Now I could sit here for a while and try to drag them so that they're perfectly aligned, but we have another tool that's specifically for getting things aligned. It's called the alignment tool, and currently it's grayed out because to align two objects we need to select two objects. So with my half sphere selected, we're going to select the cylinder by holding shift and clicking on it, and then selecting the align tool. And you can see when it's activated, our handles for changing the size and angle of something change to these circles for aligning objects. Now we want to align them front and back, so we use this one that aligns them front and back. We then use this one to align them left and right. Now, do you think we want to align them top and bottom? No. If we align them top and bottom, we're going to lose this half circle inside the body. Just to show you what that would look like, we're going to try it out. And there you go. You can see we've lost our half circle as it's sunk into the body just there. So to undo that, remember we've got our undo tool up here. And that gives us our body back as we were expecting. Now, so they don't come out of alignment again, I'm going to select both of them and use that group tool just like before. Now, when things are grouped, they will be the same color, but just because they're the same color doesn't mean that they're grouped. So when you see two colors become one when you use that tool, you know that it's working properly. Okay, the next part we're going to add to this is a head, and a head is kind of like a sphere, so we're going to start with a sphere. I'm going to drag it in to make it a bit more head-shaped, bring it up to match our body, just like you can see there. Now heads are a bit wider than that, or at least mine is, so we're just going to drag that just like that. We're then going to, again, while our sphere is selected, select our torso and use the align function just as we did before. And now we have our first person to sit at the table. So I'm going to group them together, position it where I want next to the table. Now you can see that this person's actually a bit small to fit on our table. So I'm going to make them bigger by holding Shift, selecting one of our handles and dragging it up. And then I'm going to use our rotate tool so that they're facing the table. Just like that. Now we move them in so that they're just overlapping, so that when it prints as a single piece. You can see it's still a little bit small, so we're going to make it a bit bigger again. Now we want a few of these around our table because we're having a whole family. So I'm going to come up to the top left here and use the copy tool. This then, just like any other program, creates a clone or a copy of it, and then use the paste tool so that we've got another one. So I'm going to put this one over here, and then another paste, so we don't need to copy again, it's still on the clipboard, so we can just keep pasting and building our family around the table. Just like that. Okay, so we've got our jelly, we've got our family. Now if we're trying to show a family dinner, what do you think the next step might be? That's right, we're going to add the dinner. So let's start with a plate to put it on. So we're going to use a cylinder, and then going to use another cylinder and a box. And the reason I'm going to do this is because I want not a round plate, but something a bit more oval. So by using these two cylinders, I can then connect them with a rectangle from our box, select all three together and group them, and then I'm going to make it a bit thinner because at the moment it's quite thick. Now, at the moment it's a bit more of a tray, so I'm just going to use that copy tool and that paste tool to get another one. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger, put it on top, and there's our tray. It might be a bit too big even. There we go. So I'm going to select them both, use that align tool again, and make sure they're even. Now, to create a hole in this top piece, I'm actually going to use the bottom one. So I'm going to copy it and paste it, move it up a bit, and then just like we did with jelly to cut a hole in the table, we're going to use the hole tool to cut some space into the top of our tray. So we use the align tool, so we can drag a box over to select multiple objects. Use our align tool to make sure they're all spick and span and perfectly aligned. And then our group tool to make it into one piece. Now, I'm going to use the sketch tool to create some dinner for us. So I'm thinking we're going to start with a chicken. So I'm just going to draw the main body of the chicken to start with. Remembering to try and get rid of any little crevices because they'll cause problems later when we 3D print. So there's the body of our chicken. I'm then going to use our scribble tool again. And this time I'm going to create the legs. So where before we used quite uniform shapes and then join them together to create something more complicated, for this one I'm going to use the scribble tool to create a series of smaller shapes and then join all of them together to create something a bit more complicated. So just fill that in. And then we're going to give the bone at the end. So this is our drumstick here. And then one last one just to make the wing. And there we go. We've got the 3 pieces to make our roast chicken. So to start with, we're going to make our body a little bit bigger. Our leg is a little bit too big, so we're going to shrink that down. Now, you might have noticed that chickens have more than one leg, so we're going to use our copy tool again and paste to create a second leg for this side. Now at the moment they're looking very flat, but I want to rotate them together. So what I'm going to do is select the first one, hold shift, select the second one, and then use our rotate tool to make them stick up a little bit more, and then position them onto the rest of our chicken, just like that. Now our wing is very big, so let's shrink that down. And use our copy and paste. So we've got a second one. Put that up near the top. And there we go. So to make life a little bit easier, I'm going to select both our leg and our wing. Use the align tool, make sure they're flush on the bottom. Do that for the other half. Then I'm going to select both of these and use our group tool so that becomes one object. Select our wing and our leg, use our group tool so that becomes one object, and then going to select the top and the bottom and group them so that becomes one object. So we've now got all our wings and legs together, so we can move them as one piece. I'm then going to hold shift and select our middle, but before using the group tool I'm going to use the align tool again. I'm going to use that to bring the body of the chicken up to match. I'm then going to use our group to make that into one roast chicken piece, rotate it over, rotate it around, and then put it onto our platter. Now you can see our wings sticking through there, and we don't want that. So I'm going to rotate it just a little bit by moving the cursor outside of the circle. And you can see now it goes to 1 degree increments, and rotate it just enough to bring the wing back into the plate. So now that we've got our plate put together, I'm going to select the whole thing, group that together, and move it up onto the table. Now this is a very big chicken for 5 people, but I'm sure that they can arrange some leftovers. Now to help fill this out, we want to give everyone a set of cutlery. So over here in an empty space, I'm just going to build a dinner set. So we're going to start with a plate and do this the same way as I did the big platter. Copy and paste our first cylinder, make it a smidgen larger to represent the lip of the plate. Use the base, copy and paste, make it a hole to create a gap in it. Use our align tool to bring it all together and then group it. So we've got a plate that we'll give everyone at the table. I then want to give everyone a fork, and I'm going to cheat a bit with this fork. So rather than drawing it from scratch, I'm going to use 2 letters. The first letter, I'm going to use a T. I'm going to use the sans font. And this gives me a shape that is the letter T, but is also 2 boxes already connected, already symmetrical. I'm then going to use copy and paste, and again in that shape box up the top right here, I'm going to create the letter E. And this is going to be the pointy part of our fork. So I'm going to rotate that around, making sure it snaps to 90 degrees. Put it at the top of our fork and then squish it down just to match and make our T a little bit longer here. And that looks like a fork to me. So I'm going to select them all together, use the group tool, and now we have a fork. Now which side does a fork go on? I'm going to quickly jump in Google and have a look for that one. Ah, it is the left side, so I got lucky with that, didn't I? Alrighty. Now that that's there, we're going to come and create the knife. So I'm going to use a round roof, rotate it through 90 degrees so that it's like a half cylinder, just like that. We're going to stretch it out a bit more like a knife. Use the box tool to give it a handle. And then use the align tool to make sure that it's all neat. Select both of those and group it together. Now at the moment it's a lot taller than our fork and they're normally the same height. So I'm going to select our fork and get its dimension, which is 58 millimeters tall. Select our knife, activate its dimensions and make sure that it's the same. Whoop, what have I done? 58. Place that on that side. So we've now got our knife, fork, and plate. I'm going to select all of them, make sure they're aligned together, just to keep it neat. I'm then going to use the group tool, and this is our table setting for each person. I'm going to move it onto our table, shrink it down a bit while holding that shift key. And then copy and paste it for each person. Sitting at the table. Making sure to rotate it as we go so that nobody ends up grabbing their knife by the blade, because we want the future to know that we were very safe. And there we go. And that's our family having dinner together. Now, while I leave you to that, we're going to take a short break so you can work on your design, and then we'll be back in about 5 minutes. If you have any questions, please remember to just pop them into the comments and I'll answer them for you. Okay? Have fun. And welcome back to our National Science Week challenge. So now that we've created the start of our family, let's add a little bit more detail. So I'm going to pull one of these people out of our design and make them look a little bit different. So, I'm going to start by ungrouping them. And I'm pretty happy with the size of their heads in relation to their body, so I'm going to make sure not to change that. So to do that, I'm going to ungroup it to start with. And I'm going to place it right way up, just so it's a little bit easier for the way I work. But this bit's up to you. You might find that for you personally, you don't need to do this bit, but I find that it just makes it a little bit easier when you're looking down at it rather than trying to move in three-dimensional space while it's up in the air. So to make sure I can't make any major adjustments to it, I'm just going to use the lock tool up here. And this means it's just going to sit there, and you can see I can select it, but I can't move it or change its shape by accident. I'm going to start attaching things onto it just to make it look a little bit more like a person. The first thing I'm going to add is a nose. Now if we have a look through all of our different shapes here, you can see that there isn't really a nose shape. So I'm going to start with a paraboloid, which is like a pointy cone, but it's a bit rounded off. Except if you look at the nose, it's not just one pointy bit. It's actually got a little pointy bit on each side. So I'm going to make it a bit longer, just like that. I'm going to add another one to this side, another one to this side. Going to get these two lined up, just like that. Make this one a little bit tall, just like that. And you can see at the moment it's starting to look a little bit like an alien, but I'm going to use a third one, and this is where it's going to get a little bit fancy. So I'm going to drag it up like this, I'm going to make this one into a hole. Okay, can you guess what we're doing? So I'm going to select both of the nostril bits on the side and group them together. That way they'll stay horizontally aligned. Select all of them together, use our alignment tool just like that. Make sure that all the bits I don't want are covered by this hole, and then group them together. And that's going to be our nose. You can see it's currently a bit big for the face, so I'm going to shrink it down just like that. Oop. Now you can make sure it's up enough that it looks like a nose. There we go. And there is a bit of a funky looking nose. Now if you see here and we go, oh, those nostrils are a bit big, what we can do is ungroup it and we get all the pieces back, and we can make those nostrils a little bit smaller. Make sure they're all aligned again. Whoop. There we go. There is our nose. Now because that's a lockdown, we can actually align it to the center of the face just like that. Now that we've done that, I want to give it a mouth. So what I'm going to do is use this torus. And the reason I'm going to do this is because, well, to start with, I can stretch it out like this, but then I can use these settings here to make that radius just what I like, but then make the tube stick in like that. Now to get rid of half of it, because at the moment it looks a little bit too round, I'm going to use a box and just cut off the lower half. Make sure that matches up. Group them together, and this is going to be our top lip. Now, different people's top lip and bottom lip are a bit different, so I'm going to use the mirror tool to mirror it that way. Oh, I missed a step. Can you guess what it is? Yeah, if we have two lips, I'm going to need to copy and paste one of them and then mirror that one. So now we've got our two lips, and then just to make it a little bit more even, I'm going to shrink that bottom one down and then use our group tool and our align tools to make sure that everything is aligned just the way I'd like. Make them a bit flatter, shrink them down to fit the face, change them to different color just so they stand out. How are we looking? Whoop. I've done something with that one. No, that's right. Boom. And there's some lips. Now we're going to add some eyes. So I'm going to always start much bigger than what I need, because that'll make it easier to make some changes. Then what I'm going to do is actually use think paraboloid, make it into a hole. I'm going to use this so that we can use some different layers of depth to create some detail in the eye. So using our align tool, I'm going to bring these up to the same height. Actually going to make this even bigger. So you can see now we've got the eye and what could be the whole iris, but I'm going to select that one. Going to copy and paste. Make another one inside. So this will be where there's a little groove there, and that will create some shadow so that it looks like there's a line in the final version. And then to replicate the black pupil of our eye, I'm going to use a cylinder. To put a hole all the way through. Make sure they're all neatly aligned. Group that together. And there we go. That's going to be our eye. Again, you can see it's still a bit big for our face. So we're going to shrink it down. Position it just so that sticking out. At the moment, it's looking a little bit like a frog, but I think that's okay. Now, just like with those chicken legs and wings before, we want to make sure that they're aligned on our head. So I'm going to group both eyes to each other. Then hold Shift and select the head, and then use our central align tool. So at the moment we've got our eyes, our nose, and our mouth. Now that's going to be the same for all of the people in our family, and then we're just going to change some bits and pieces about each of the 5 people. So I'm going to select all of those together. I'm going to unlock everything so that now we can move that head around. And I'm going to group them together so that if we scale one up or down, everything will always stay together. So if I've got 1 and there's 5 heads here, I'm going to change each one up a little bit. So rather than copy and pasting each time, this time I'm going to use the duplicate and repeat tool. Now this is like copy and paste, but it acts a little bit more powerfully. So I'm going to use duplicate and repeat, which does our first copy in the same spot. And if I move this copy, just like that, you can see all I've done is move it. And then every time I hit duplicate and repeat, it's going to copy and repeat that movement. So we've got our first one, second, third, fourth, and fifth. And now we have 5 heads, each ready to change. So for our first one here, I'm just going to move them even more out of the way. I'm going to make my face. Now that might be a risky move, and that's okay. But the first thing that a lot of people notice about me is that I have glasses. So I'm going to have a look through all of these. And you can see down here we've got tube. And tube is like a cylinder with a hole already made in it. And that's what I'm going to use to make our glasses. So starting with our first one, I'm going to copy and paste. That gives us our second one. I'm then going to use the tube again, but this time I'm going to use a box to cut it in half. Ooh, make sure our box has been turned into a hole. Join them together, and this is going to be the little bridge that holds the 2 halves of my glasses together. Going to select our 2 lenses and group them so that we can align them more easily. Select the bridge in the nose and use our align tool to bring them all into one piece. I can then group that together, raise it up, stick it onto my face. Now you'll notice they're a bit big, so just by holding Shift, make them fit my head. And there we go, now I've got some glasses on. The next thing that I think we might add are some hair. Now the hair, I'm going to use our scribble tool. And you can see at the moment that my hair has a bit of a swoosh happening. So I'm just going to go aside like this. And then this can be a bit rough because my hair is never that neat. I've always got a bit of a cowlick. And just have it stick up. Just like that. Now this bit's gone a bit far, so I'm going to use that erase tool again. Trim that bit back in. I'm going to cut some gaps in it just to give it some texture. Call that done. Then going to match it to my head. And there is my hair and my head. So we're going to select all of them, group them together, and we'll call this one me. Now there's one problem with this that we'll need to fix before we can do anything else, and that's this little bit here that I've missed when we've erased it. So to fix that, what I need to do is select where it is, ungroup them again so that I've got each piece editable, select the hair, and then we're going to go edit scribble up in that shape box. Now you can see that extra piece that we left, and I'm just going to erase that out. And then now that I'm looking at it, I think this hair can be a little bit more crazy, so I'm going to add some more of a coif to it. If you're not sure what a coif is, ask your parents if they grew up in the 80s. And there we go. There's my amazing hair. We'll select all that together and group it. And that's me done. Now we're going to move on to my dad. Now he's got a bit of a moustache. Now we could use the scribble tool again and draw him a moustache, but I think if we have a look under the basic shapes link here, it actually gives us access to a whole lot more in terms of different things that we can attach. So at the moment we've been using basic shapes, but if we come down to characters, you can see that now we've got all these different pieces. So I could have used the glasses that were here, but I'm going to use the mustache. And you can see the mustache is ready to go. All we need to do is rotate it through 90 degrees, bring it up to match the face, shrink it down just a bit to be more consistent with the size of the face that we've made. So there's his moustache. Now having a look through here, there's nothing else that I think we need for my dad. Maybe the egg for his head, but let's go back to our basic shapes. And I'm going to give him some hair using, let's use the round roof. So I'm going to rotate this up, turn it like this, and this will be his hair. I'm going to copy and paste so that it's the same, flip it in that direction using this mirror tool, and then align it on the other side. And there we go, that's my dad. Now, next let's do my sister. Now to do my sister, I think we should go back to the characters, and let's use that moustache again. But this time, rather than using it as a moustache, we're going to make a couple of little adjustments and use it as some fancy eyebrows. So to do that, I'm going to trim it using our box shape again. So this time I'm going to rotate it and put it just like this. So this will be one eyebrow, and then copy and paste and use that mirror tool to create the other eyebrow. Now my sister's eyebrows aren't quite this crazy, but I think when we're working with small things that we're going to 3D print, creating over-the-top features will help make it all stand out. And hopefully she's not watching this and we'll see how she goes. So then we're going to give her some hair. I think for that one, let's use the scribble. Now, like we've been doing with some of the other bits, rather than drawing the whole head of hair, I'm just going to draw half a head. I can pop that one in. Scale a little bit. So there's the first half. And then use the mirror tool. Whoop. Use the mirror tool to create the second half. And then just to help make it look a bit more natural and less even, shrink this one down a bit, but make sure it's actually thicker. And there we go. This one can be my sister. Now to do my mum. My mum normally wears her hair in a long plait. So to help her do that, we're going to make a plait. Just going to start with one of these. We're then going to copy, paste, use our mirror tool, and offset it a bit. And then use that one again, copy, paste. And that one's going to go there. And now we've got something that looks vaguely like a plait. Just like that. And then to give us some more hair, let's use a half sphere. To just add some dimension on the head. And remember, with 3D we can look at it from lots of different angles. So we can put that one in, and then let's make it even bigger to go down the back, and then use a copy to give it more hair, just like that. And by just changing each one just a little bit, because it's naturally quite a random looking piece, it doesn't look quite as obvious that we've used the same piece 3 times. There's my family. So we're going to select... Oh, we missed one. We missed my brother. I think he did shave for a cure this year, so his head might be bald. So let's leave him as he is. We're going to select all of them, rotate them back up 90 degrees. And now we don't need any of these heads. So I'm going to select all 4 of those, ungroup them, and then, much as the French said during the Revolution, off with those heads. And then we're just going to add on all of the new heads that we've made. You can see as we get more complicated, it becomes a little bit harder to do things that at the beginning were quite simple, because now we care a little bit more about where things end up. And there we go. Now we've added a lot more detail into our family there. So we'll give it a pause there, and then we'll be back in about 5 minutes, and then we'll run through the last stage that can be used to just add some more details. If when we go to any of these breaks you have any questions, or even during, please don't hesitate to pop it into the chat and we'll answer it as soon as we can. welcome back. Now, if you're happy with your design at any time and you want to call it an evening, just head on over to bit.ly/Rosetta Tomorrow with capitals for Rosetta and Tomorrow. Scroll down towards the bottom. Welcome back. Let's get rid of that little echo. Scroll down to the bottom, all the way past the examples and the tutorials to where we've got share your design. Now you've got two options here. You can either go straight to this section at the very, very bottom, click the plus icon, and cut and paste a link to your design, and we'll have a look at it. But that's just to show. If you'd like to enter the competition so that we'll 3D print it for you and put it in a little time capsule, then make sure you fill out the entry form directly above it. All you need to do is put in your name, what you've called your design, an email address so we can let you know if you've won, and a link to your submission. Now that that's out of the way, let's get back into the design process. So now that we've got our dog down here, we're going to do something very similar to what we did with the chicken, just to make it look a little bit more detailed. But there's a couple of extra tools buried in TinkerCad's shapes that we're going to use to make it a little bit clearer. So let's select all of this and just move it way out of the way so that we've got some space to work with without getting rid of it. I'm going to press the home icon here to recenter our page. And then we're going to come down through basic shapes into characters. And let's have a look at what we've got. So we've got some hands, but what we're looking for is actually a dinosaur. Now, different things are in different spaces. Some of them are obvious. Connectors are under connectors. If we come all the way down here to skeleton, we have a glow-in-the-dark skeleton that we can print and put together. But for our dog, we're actually going to use the dinosaur. The reason we're going to use this one is because a dinosaur is not too different to a dog. We've got a tail, we've got an upper jaw and a lower jaw, we've got a foot and another foot, that might be enough to get us started. But we only need one foot. Let's just make it a few times. So, starting with this foot, we're going to copy and paste to give us a second one. Then we're going to rotate this just a bit to give us our 4 toes for our paw. Then we're going to come back to basic shapes and use a cylinder cut just to get rid of this extra material at the back. It's going to take a few minutes to process. There we go. So that's the first part of our paw. And then going to use dinosaur. Let's use this neck piece. Now the reason we're using these isn't because they're necessarily special pieces, but they're just slightly different shapes with a few different things about them. So rather than attaching all the pieces together to get this shape, it's already been done for us. Now you'll notice when I go to change the size that it changes to purple, and this means that it's currently locked. So if we lock and unlock editing, you can see it doesn't actually let us change the size like before. And that's specifically because of these connectors. So to make sure that all your connectors work and are able to connect into each other, it doesn't let you change the shape or size. So the way to kind of sneak around that is by grouping it with another basic shape. Now, as we're not using the connectors in this case, I'm just going to trim them off. Like so. Now something else we can try is if we wanted to keep the connector as a connector, if we group it with something that's not overlapping, you can see that it doesn't let us change the size. So it needs to overlap. So we can make cosmetic changes like adding grooves, but we can't completely keep it as it is and then start doing things. There we go. So let's use this as our it's not letting us do it for that one. That's okay. We've got our paw, and I think it's not letting us do that one either. What are we gonna do? They've all got a connector. I think that's why it's locked it. Well, that was an interesting learning experience for all of us. So let's jump back in and have a look at our shape generators. So these are a little bit special compared to what you have seen in some of the other ones. So where we had individual letters before and we could make long horizontal strings of text, we've got access to these curved ones that let us write it vertically and flat, just like that, to match a curve. We've also got some fans and boxes that will snap together, lots of different pieces. And if we go to all shape generators, there'll be even more. So I think we might use an Australian map because we're in Australia. We can make that look very weird. Can we just, whoop. I think it's going to get grumpy if we change it, even if we do want to get rid of Tasmania. So let's use, let's have a look what we've got. I think pie chart might be handy. What do you think? Does anyone have any preferred things that we could include in here? That's okay. So let's bring our family table back in and let's keep improving the detail. So where initially we had this big red box, let's take that away. We'll keep our jelly for now. by ungrouping it. And then let's change this box by sticking a few shapes together to create something a little bit more fancy. So let's use our polygon. We're just going to turn this flat sheet into our table. So to make sure we get each corner, we can use the Align tool to align it to each corner one at a time. And then there's our table. To add chairs, rather than rebuilding each one, we can just scale down our table. Make sure we're happy with the rough size. And then just to make it a bit easier, we're going to ungroup all of those pieces again. Make the top a little bit thicker. Select all the legs. Whoop. A little bit better. So there's our chair. Now, I've done something that a lot of people do, which is where I've started copying it faster than we really want. So we don't actually want all of our chairs just yet, because these bodies aren't going to be able to sit on them. So what we do for that is we know that our heads are done and we're going to keep them the way they are, but let's change our bodies to match. Now, let's come back into our characters. Now that we've got hands, let's give everyone's knife and fork into their hands. Now you might be saying, Michael, but there's only one set of left hands. Where's the right? Where's our other hand? And do you remember which tool we used for that? It's our mirror tool. So even though we've currently got two right hands, by using our mirror tool, we now have a matching left hand. So we've got our knife and our fork. Let's group them together. And our plate. Let's make much bigger because it's easier to add detail to a big design and then shrink it down. So on this plate we're going to use this one, which was our N lobe rod from our advanced shapes, and this has a few features in it that we can adjust to make it look a little bit more creative. So here's our first piece, and that's just what we got out of the generator. If we create a new one, we can go, let's adjust the number of leaves to 16, and you can see that now we've got a different shape. Let's do it again, except this time we're going to make it a bit taller. Erode the bottom to pinch it in, and erode the top just a bit. And now you can see we've got 3 different shapes, 3 different objects out of that one, and that can be our first plate. Now to add arms to these hands, if we have a look through, you can see we don't have access to any arms at the moment. So what we're going to do is quickly add an arm, and where we have been using our box shape, we're going to come down, and we're actually going to use a paraboloid. If we stretch this paraboloid way up, you can see we get just a bit of curve there as it mostly flattens out, and then we're going to use this box to trim off the top. And this is just so that we don't get it quite as pointy as the paraboloid, but not quite as uniform as the cylinder, so it's got a little bit of curve to it. And now this one is going to be our arm. So now we've got 2 arms. So let's scale these back down by holding Shift, just until we're happy that it matches with our body again. Then bring that around to the front. Whoop. Now these are meant to be the other way around, so if we just do a quick mirror, and then we can rotate these. To suit how we wanted them. So we can use those same arms for the next one. In fact, let's clear the table. Lock that. Lock that. Jamie's the only one who's getting any food at the moment. there's our first ones. Now we're going to create some legs. And you'll notice one of the main tools that helps you get this done faster is to use shapes you've already made rather than rebuilding them every time. So to add a foot, keep it simple. And if ever you can't line up two shapes because they're just a bit far away, it always helps to use that align tool just to navigate so that you can see that they match up. And remember to keep track of the biggest shape first. So when you're building things, don't start with the toes, start with the foot. And then, when you need just a little bit of adjustment, rather than clicking and dragging, you can use the keyboard shortcuts to just bump things along. And then rather than creating another leg from scratch so that it's facing the other way, just using that mirror tool. So, not selecting the head, but selecting the rest of this body we've made with the chair. Now, you can move everyone away from the table. Just like that, we've now got a whole family sitting around the table, and we can ungroup each of these to get the heads back. Just pop the heads onto the new bodies. And now that we don't have a table to deboss jelly into, we can make a solid. Just overlap hotel with the table a bit so that when we print it, it still comes out as one piece. Alright. So, now that we've got our 5, we want to make it look a little bit more dynamic. So I'm going to ungroup each of these bodies. And we're just going to do some small changes just to make them a little bit different. So we're going to put Dad's arms back. I'm going to put mine up a smidge. We might rotate Mum's. My brother, give him some guns. There we go. We'll do the same thing with the plates. And then because we used the shape generator, rather than changing and swapping out shapes with other shapes from somewhere else, we can just select these and change some of the properties. And we create enough variation that they all just look a little bit interesting. Now no mill would be complete if this hadn't been cut into, so we're just going to add a big cut. You can see we've got some warnings down here, but we've got enough of the shape, so we don't need to worry about it too much just yet. Here's our cut in that chicken. There we go. Now, depending on how far in the future, maybe the world has changed that Australia doesn't look like that anymore, but just in case, let's add that to the bottom of the table. Partly because it will help support the bottom of the table when it prints, but mainly so that we can just add a little bit more detail and make it a little bit more creative. So making sure everyone's heads are attached because they're overlapping. Group all this together. And when it's done, you can see all those red lines appearing, meaning it's calculating. There's one more thing we want to do so that this is usable. So at the moment, you can see the bottom is very uneven. So if we were to print this, that's going to cause some problems for us. Oh, a couple of things have gone funky there. Everything's connected together, but we can make it a little bit more even. So if we come up and select our box, we're just going to flatten everything out by creating a box as a whole that's flat on our 0 plane, and then making it way bigger than it needs to be. So that we trim everything off and just get rid of some of the extra bits we don't need anymore, just to clear up some space. Then we're going to make this thicker, just enough to make sure that everything gets a cut. We'll see. Whoop. Something in there is getting grumpy. I think we might have a few too many emails. But one of them's disappeared, so maybe that'll solve our problem. Let that chug away. Oh, I think it's these very complicated ones. Maybe we've given everyone a bit too much food. Alrighty, so let's let that process very slowly. So the red's telling us that it's currently calculating all of those again. While that's happening, let's jump back and I'll show you a couple more cool little things that we can do with TinkerCad. I think we've made a very big file. There we go. So just in a new space so that we don't mess around with what we've made, I'm going to show you how to create a couple of objects that people often have some stress with. So something that people often try to make in one of our programs where they were designing steampunk props was clock faces. So there's a few different ways to go about it, but I'm going to show you the one that I prefer. To start with, we're going to use text. We're going to make this one our 12, which is XII. We're then going to Control-C, Control-V to make 6, which is our VI. Now, what people will try to do is if they're going to make these around a clock face, they'll go Control-C, Control-V, put that one, I think it goes about there, and so on and so forth. But we can actually be a lot more exacting. So we're going to make it our full workspace. We're going to align these two together, and then we're going to group them. We then have 12 numbers on a clock, so we're going to divide that by 2 because we've got 2 numbers here. We're going to go copy, and then we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this gives us 12 digits to start with. We're then going to select everything and align them to the center. And then one by one, so when we select, it's going to select one of them at random. I'm going to rotate it just a bit. So what have we got? 90 divided by 3. So we're going to rotate this to 30 degrees. Then we're going to select our next one. Rotate that to 60 degrees. Get the next one to 90 degrees. You can see what we're doing here. and 20 degrees. Probably easier to type it, isn't it? So there we go, and then we just come through, ungroup all of those, you can go I, IV, B, B, I, B, I, X, X, and X, I. Now we've got all our different numbers there. Some of them, like this, you'll notice are a bit big, but we can now shrink them down, position them a little bit more easily. The other thing, of course, we can do, select everything that's not our major ones, shrink them all down together. By holding Alt, we shrink on the same middle spot. Or, because they're all numbers, we can change our font to something a little bit narrower, but I'm liking this idea. Smaller numbers in the middle. Now if we want hands on our clock, for something steampunky themed, we want to make them a bit elaborate. So to do that, we're going to use our scribble tool, and we want to point at the end, and then something below that. And then go create a copy, clip, just like we did with the hair before. We'll use this as one of our hands. And if we want another one that's the same but longer and a bit more ornate, we can edit this scribble. We can go, this one's going to be our minute hand. So we want it to have some extra bits as we go. Then we do the same thing again. Line them up at the tip. group that, and I can hear you saying, but Michael, I don't like that end. Well, that's what the tube's for. Now the issue that you think we might have is getting this back into the middle exactly, but if we select all of this, group it together, we're then going to go Control-CV, create a mirror, create another mirror, and then all we need to do is align these new groups. And we can clear out those. So you'll notice here something we did quite consistently was group opposite ones so that we could rotate around the center. Now this isn't a tool that's immediately available, but it's very powerful for doing just this kind of thing. Now if we decided we wanted a very crazy object to put it in, a very crazy clock buddy, let's start with this circle. What we're going to do is use that duplicate and repeat. So previously we just used this for cut and pasting to create multiples of the same object, but this time we're going to do a few more things. We're going to rotate it, we're going to lift it, and then we're going to tilt it back just a bit. And then every time we do that, you can see we create this spiraling oblong. Now you hear me clicking frantically, but when we hover over any of these controls, it actually gives us the keyboard shortcuts. So what we can do is just go Control-D, and then just easily click the button until we're vaguely happy. Then what I'm going to do is rotate this back to flat-ish. And then duplicate and repeat, just going around so we get a nice flat top. Created a very interesting looking shape there, so let's just even that up. just going to make a very fancy but fairly simple to build clock body here. You can see we don't need to be super accurate as we go. We can try our best, but if it's not perfect, that's what the extra tools are for. You can see as we start getting complicated and using a lot of objects, it starts to chug just a little bit. Sometimes while it's calculating, we can work on the next section. And remembering to use these settings will help us to line everything up. And there you go, we have a very interesting looking clock tower. And maybe you can create some kind of story to go along with it, and that's part of your entry. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you've had a bit of fun, you've learned a bit of something new, and we look forward to seeing you next time we do another challenge. Maybe it's Science Week, maybe your school comes in. But until then, have a nice day.